In section 4 of chapter 3, we're going to be talking about tackling the problems, reforms in Indian agriculture. Now, there are three core sections to this unit. The first being technical reforms, the second being institutional reforms, and the last being general reforms. However, each of these are quite detailed, so we're going to take a bigger look at what's going on here. So the technical reforms have 5 subsections, the institutional reforms also have 5 subsections, and the general reforms have 4 subsections. So let's start our discussion by focusing on the technical reforms. Now, the technical reforms begins with its first topic, the use of HYV seeds. Now, what are HYV seeds? So HYV stands for high yielding variety. Now, these are genetically modified or engineered seeds such that they are able to release a greater yield or greater threshold of production as compared to traditional seeds. Now, this technology has been around since 1965 and it's been in use all over the world. Secondly, there is now increased use of chemical fertilizers. Traditionally, cow dung was used to fertilize the land. However, chemical fertilizers have been increasingly used in India, and now, in recent years, this use has grown rapidly. The next topic is the use of insecticides and pesticides for crop protection. This is an area where many countries debate whether or not this is good for human consumption, to consume produce that has been infected or protected by insecticides and pesticides. Now, although there is some debate in this area, what cannot be denied is use of insecticides and pesticides will guarantee the crops will actually be produced and not damaged by animals or wildlife in the wild. The next topic is scientific farm management. This is basically using modern science to get Indian farmers to move away from their traditional practices, which may in fact be inefficient. Some of the methods being used in scientific farm management include crop rotation, selection of seeds, judicious use of fertilizers, dry farming practices, and a bunch more. These also will allow for greater yields. And finally, mechanized means of cultivation. This means using more machines on farms in order to harvest the produce. In the past, this may not have been possible due to lack of credit availability. However, there have been some movements in this area which allow farmers to engage in more mechanized means of cultivation. So these are all the 5 aspects of technical reforms. So if we go back now, we notice now the next topic, institutional reforms, also has 5 subsections. The first of these is the abolition of intermediaries. So we're going to discuss this in the lesson a little bit, but basically this is the issuance of middlemen. And what they do is they siphon off profits by having access to the retail markets, and the farmers have been isolated from them for a long time. However, because they're being abolished, farmers now have direct access to markets, and this means the end user will be able to buy goods at a cheaper price, and farmers will be able to earn more profits for their produce. Secondly, the regulation of rent. The government has set up regulations such that the value of rent cannot be excessive. In fact, the limit is set at 1/3 of the value of the crop. The next point goes directly to what we mentioned in the last section about small and scattered land holdings. The government is trying to work towards consolidating land holdings, allowing each land parcel to be increased in size such that we can use larger means of technology and machinery to harvest crops on those lands. The next point after that is the ceiling on land holdings. This seems quite suspicious, as the last paragraph argued that we are consolidating land holdings to increase size, but then this point is a ceiling on land holdings. But actually, this is quite important because some people hold excessive sized land plots and they don't actually use them to harvest any crops, and they're left barren. So the government is seizing those properties such that they can be cultivated. And finally, cooperative farming. Cooperative farming is encouraged so that further gains of consolidations of holdings can be had, and this will allow farmers to work together to increase their bargaining power. Now that this is done, we return to our core topic and we notice that only general reforms remain. So in general reforms, there are 4 points. The first is the expansion of irrigation facilities. As mentioned earlier, the British government did not set up any irrigation facilities, so the agricultural sector was highly dependent on rainfall for produce. However, now that irrigation is expanding, and now virtually 45% of arable land has access to irrigation. Although this is still by far nowhere near where it should be, it is a vast improvement from the levels in 1951, which are only at 17%. Secondly, the provision of credit. The provision of credit is an important aspect. If we're going to allow land holdings to increase and hope that farmers use technology and machinery to cultivate the land, they are going to have access to funds such that they can invest in machinery. So, because of this, in 1982, the National Bank for Agricultural and Rural Development, short formed as NABARD, was established to allow credit facilities to reach farmers. And according to this textbook, recent statistics indicate that in 2014 and 15, the amount of institutional credit that was reaching the agricultural sector was 800,000 crore rupees. Next, regulated markets and cooperative marketing societies. Well, this is very important for a variety of reasons, but mainly we want to make sure that farmers have access to markets so that they can sell their produce and eliminate middlemen. And by doing so, we want to make sure those markets are fair for both the buyer and the seller. And at the same time, we want to make sure that people are working with each other as opposed to against each other, hence the cooperative marketing societies. What do the societies do to ensure fairness? Well, they've set up a grading system so that the produce can be graded at a certain level, A, B, C, D, or E, and each level of produce has a kind of expected price within the market so that both the seller and the buyer have some understanding what the fair market value for that produce may be. And finally, the price support system. This is basically a subsidy. And what happens here is that the government guarantees a certain amount of money to the seller of a particular good. So that way, if the market price falls due to volatility, there may be a shortage of supply of that product. But we know that given product, say rice, may be a very important produce to the whole of society. So even though the price falls, the government wants these farmers to continue harvesting them so they could be used and stored for some future purpose. As a result, the government offers a subsidy to the producers of the rice, and that way they are ensured no matter what the market price is, they will get a guaranteed minimum support price. So now that we've looked at these agrarian reforms, basically the technical reforms, institutional reforms, and the general reforms, we can see that the Indian government has taken a significant interest in trying to ensure that the farmers are able to improve their technical know-how, that institutional reforms exist in such a way that is substantive to them, and general reforms in the market itself allow these farmers to benefit from the current market situation.